Hi, welcome to How Did You Get Here, the podcast about generational trauma and resilience, the stories we were brought to the world with, and the stories that we are actively writing for our next chapters. I just banged my heel in the floor out of excitement. Okay, we will roll with it. I'm Maya Kruger. I'm a licensed psychotherapist. I'm also an artist and a mother and a wife and a friend and a human who doesn't know things and who is constantly curious about learning other things about the human condition. This podcast really came from a place of questioning why I became a therapist. This was also the theme of my thesis in grad school about generational trauma. What makes me me? What made me want to become a therapist, which is a bizarre profession when you really think about it, but gives me so much joy and meaning. Why do we do this? What actually gives people meaning in their lives? And what parts of who I perceive myself to be are actually me, or they were given to me, either genetically or story-wise or trauma-wise, or I was told these things about myself. So on this podcast, I'm going to be interviewing some really interesting people about their own stories, how they got to where they are in their life, what they're hoping for their next chapters, and really digging into this question of what made you become the you that you currently are. A little bit about myself. When I said that I made this thesis about generational trauma, I say made thesis and not wrote it because I wrote it and it was also a performance thesis where I did this one-woman show called Hand-Me-Downs where I played my deceased grandmother, deceased mother, and myself. This was at this point almost 12 years ago, which is crazy to think. And I wanted to understand, how do I become a different version of woman, mainly mother, and create a different narrative so my future daughters, which I now have 2 daughters, it's insane that I did this before, would write or say something different about their experience of being a person in the world, mainly a daughter. My own experience of being a daughter and being a girl and then being a woman was that fear was a giant part of my identity, that loss was a big part of it, that it's complex to be a woman, that being a mother is a tug of war between being present and reliving your own childhood shit of abandonment. And I lost my mom when I was 18. It was very shocking. And she lost her mom when she was 26. My goal in life is to become the first living grandmother in the family to my children. Hopefully they would like to have children one day, but I would like nothing more than to be the old, wise, weird grandma in the family. And I realized that if I am to become that, I need to experiment with a new kind of role. So the stories I was told about what it means to be a woman or a mother in my family need to be revamped a little bit. And what I came to as a conclusion from that thesis, which then became a published chapter in a book about complicated grief, was that we need to integrate those bits we were given to create a more holistic picture. Not holistic as in, I meditate and do blah, blah, blah. No shame to that. That's awesome. Good for you. But this is about creating more of a mosaic of your identity, meaning all the pieces, the broken, the busted, the not photogenic, the extremely painful, the amazing, the brilliant, the gorgeous, the wonderful. They all have space within your system. And that is actually how we come to a place of integration. And I'm not claiming to be a perfected product of that. I am still in my own process of growth and learning. And as I said, I'm a mother. I have 2 amazing young daughters, and it makes me confront a lot of my own stuff. I think that there was a level of depth that I was able to achieve prior to becoming a mother that is a completely different ballgame since I became a mother. As in, looking at my own daughters grow up and interact with the world and with myself is teaching me so much about things I didn't dare to look at in my own experience. So back to the question of why did I become a therapist? I think that people become therapists because there's a question of self-worth sometimes. And it can start from a place of codependency, as in, I need you to feel good so I can feel okay, or I can feel like I've contributed something or I'm worthy of taking up space. I think maybe that's where it started. But what it ultimately became for me was the joy and meaning I really get from seeing people discover their own power, from them not needing therapy, from them moving on, from them really tapping into inner resources that they weren't aware were there. And being able to be a witness to that is a giant honor for me. And it's not a specific modality that I use. I use a bunch of modalities. I'm constantly learning. But some of the things that I do employ are IFS and are psychodrama, psychodynamic therapy, and MBT, which is mentalization-based therapy. We can dig more into that, but what you'll come to learn about me is that it's not about diagnostics or about these fancy titles of the modalities that therapists use for me. It ultimately comes down to the relationship between the therapist and the client, meaning the therapeutic alliance, and the safer someone feels with their therapist. I say this as someone in therapy as well. The more risks they're going to be willing to take in their personal life. Healthy risks, yes. But in order to challenge old beliefs that keep us hostage in an older version of ourselves, reliving situations that are painful, feeling like we're stuck in this cycle where no matter by intentions, I keep ending up in the same friggin' situation, like dating the same person with a different face, I like to call it. When you can meet yourself in a different way, because I think a lot of times we think that coming face to face with ourselves is painful, which is why we distract ourselves with phones and scrolling and addictions and relationships and all the things that we do to avoid interacting with our inner parts. If we can be okay with meeting with who we meet when we meet ourselves, it's going to make us trust ourselves so much more. And then we can dare to live the way we want to be living. And it doesn't mean you manifest everything that you hope for. No, it means that you accept who you are and you also accept your desires and you're willing to integrate those two and create a version of yourself that is reflective of your past and reflective of where you're going or want to be going in your life. So diagnostics are not that interesting to me. I think that they can be awesome guidelines. And of course, as a trained therapist, very familiar with the DSM-5 and also very familiar with the fact that it was written by a bunch of elderly white men over 100 years ago, updated every few years by other older white men. But that is not the ultimate truth of life. It can be awesome guidelines that help us, but mainly you can submit those codes to insurance and get reimbursed if you are so lucky to have out-of-network benefits. This is the country we live in right now. But it does not mean anything about you as a person. It can mean something about something that you've experienced, but that's not who you are. What I've seen about these labels is it keeps people almost violently stuck within these boxes, and they start to define themselves as such. So in my work with clients, it's about loosening those confines of things you were told about yourself, either generationally with things you were born into, stories you were born into, which is also the goal of this podcast, but also maybe what other clinicians have told you very well intentioned about things you're struggling with. And a diagnosis can be a godsend. You can feel like finally there's a name for what I'm feeling, and maybe there's a medication, and maybe there's a modality. It can also make you feel like there's fundamentally something very wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you. You may be in pain, you may be struggling, but there's nothing wrong with you. Every diagnostic that exists or every symptom that exists at some point was incredibly adaptive for you surviving. And we need to understand what part of you had to develop those parts to survive so that we can give them a different role internally and they don't have to take over. Because when those symptoms are inflamed, it's because they think that you need to be rescued. So when we convey within a therapeutic alliance that we are safe, those parts can kind of chill a little bit. Your real you can surface. In IFS, Internal Family Systems, it's called the self with a capital S. So that's kind of some of my ideas about therapy. The weekly theme, there were two this week. The first one was old beliefs. I have some older clients, and some of the things we were discussing were about beliefs that they hold about themselves from probably very early childhood. We've identified it as early childhood mainly because of the black and whiteness to the quality to these beliefs, as in this is an absolute truth and it will always be like this. Always and never is kind of clues to, oh, this is an old one, because there's not a lot of nuance there. And anxiety. Anxiety not as, oh, it sucks to have anxiety, which it does, but anxiety is in I go there because it's safer for me to feel anxiety than to feel something else. So anxiety as actually a rescue here. Those two really came up. So if I'm pondering on those and what it meant for me to look at in my own life, I would say that some old beliefs, even putting myself out there, here in the world, in the ether, I don't know, is challenging the belief that putting myself out there is not cringe, because it's so scary to do so. And I used to be a performer. and a theater writer. And there was something so safe about putting myself out there meaning on stage or on screen, where hidden beside or tucked behind the safety of a character, I had so much permission to express myself. And it gave me, I'm crying as the character. It's not me. I'm intense as the character. But I could hide behind that, and it felt very safe. When it's putting myself out there authentically, and I experienced this with social media, there's something so cringy about it, and I need to get over it. So those old beliefs were formed very early on for various reasons, and I want to push back against them because I'm curious to see what's there. And maybe, after filming this episode, I'm going to feel you're absolutely right, Maya. That was very cringe. I still want to do it. And I think I want to encourage us all to be a little bit more cringe. And anxiety as a way to numb ourselves, not the way we think of I'm numbing myself from anxiety, but I go to anxiety because it's simpler for me to do. It's a familiar pain, and our brain equates familiarity with safety. So even though it feels like hot garbage, I'm still going to go there. But anxiety can be the place that I resort to first, because I don't want to feel something else, because that feeling doesn't feel like a safe one. Meaning maybe it masks even something positive like hope. If it's scary for me to feel hope, that's coming from an old belief. So these two themes are kind of tying into each other. Those are the two themes I want to float this week. This is going to be a very imperfect first episode, and that's what we got. And I'm hoping I'm going to learn every week and get better and better at this. But my goal is to hear people's stories, share people's stories, learn about myself, learn about others, and continue to grow. Welcome to How Did You Get Here? It's about to get weird.